Hello everyone, what you're about to hear is the official lore to the Victoria 2 mod, Napoleon's Legacy, a world in which France won the Napoleonic Wars. Russia gives up Lithuania, which is merged with the Duchy of Warsaw, and thus, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth is reborn. They are also forced to rejoin the continental system against Britain. Napoleon then refocuses his effort on winning the Long Peninsular War. He slowly and gradually pushes the British forces back to Portugal and pacifies the Spanish guerrillas, and finally invades and captures Portugal. Portugal is split into 3 nations as punishment for their fight, all of which are directly or indirectly ruled by Spain. In North America, the War of 1812 continues long past its real-life end date. As with the war against the French Empire continuing, the British continue to raid American ships and impress their crews. With the failure of the efforts in Spain, Britain focuses all its might on the Americas, and the long blockade of its coast devastates the fledgling industrial economy of New England. As a pro-British Federalist stronghold who had been opposed to the war from the beginning, talk of secession from the Union abounds, which eventually leads to the 1816 Convention of Northern States that ends in a declaration expelling the South from the Union. The southern USA declares war on them, but their resistance, combined with British support and the continued guerrilla war waged by the Native Americans in the North, eventually leads to an American defeat. The South recognizes the independence of the North and agrees to withdraw its settlements from the disputed Northwest Territory, which Britain makes a buffer state out of by creating a land for Native Americans to live in. Now dominated by the Democratic Republican Party and the Southern landowners, a new constitutional convention is called in the South that grants much greater power to the individual states, leading to their restructuring as the Confederate States of America. Napoleon continues his undisputed rule over Europe and focuses his efforts on increasing the size of France's fleet for an inevitable final battle with Britain. Knowing that they for a fact have better admirals, he focuses on quality rather than quantity, which leads to Britain increasing its own fleet size, straining the resources of its blockaded nation even more. However, in 1823, in the midst of planning his final campaign against perfidious Albion, the Emperor is stricken with cancer of the stomach. As Napoleon II, his heir from his marriage to the Habsburg princess Marie-Louise, is merely 12 years of age, and his second son, Alexander, the heir to the Kingdom of Italy, is merely 8, the Emperor spends his last year planning with his ministers and marshals on how to run the empire when he is gone. Napoleon passes away on April 4, 1824, and is mourned by millions in the streets of Paris. Almost immediately, a new coalition against France is formed. Britain, riddled by the debt already, raises taxes and borrows even more in order to fund its continental allies, which includes Prussia, Austria, and Russia, who are all eager to gain back the territory that they have lost over the last quarter of a century. In addition to this alliance is King Murat I of Naples, a Napoleonic marshal who secretly turns traitor in the midst of a beginning of what will eventually turn into full-fledged madness, and who harbors an insane delusion that he will be able to unite all of Italy under his rule. In mid-1824, war is declared against France, and a long, bloody war begins. Without the genius of Napoleon I, and with its foes having reformed their armies along Napoleonic tactics, France is a very tough fight. Though aided by its Polish allies, who are able to at least tie down the Russian armies while Austria and Prussia march into the Confederation of the Rhine, the marshals are shocked to find that many of the German princes of the Confederation now rise against their French masters, complicating matters even further. The Italian front at least goes well, as Eugene, regent of the Kingdom of Italy, holds the Austrian border while invading Naples, and soundly defeats the foolhardy invasion attempts of Murat. In Iberia, the pacified Spanish merely hold a few pathetic uprisings, but the Portuguese prove far less accommodating. A large uprising drives the weak French states from the nation, and France quickly recognizes Portugal as free again, caring little for comparatively worthless territory, in order to ensure that another front is not formed. As the war consumes the lives of tens of thousands on the continent, the marshals turn their eyes to Britain. With the colossal fleet of the French forces, France strikes a blow against the United Kingdom. Spread out over the world, the fleet struggles to hold back the French ships and destroys many more ships than they lose. However, they are unable to prevent a large number of French troops from reaching Ireland, where a French-backed rebellion for independence springs up among the Catholic populace. With the aid of tens of thousands of French troops, the brave Irish defeat the Loyalists and force the surrender of the British troops. With this new obstacle, Britain, strained on 2 fronts, suffering from a massive loss of prestige, and faced with a bankrupted treasury and an overtaxed populace growing increasingly frustrated with the oligarchy that rules them, imposes a mass conscription. This break with hundreds of years of history inflames popular and liberal sentiment, and leads to a large uprising against the nobility and the unpopular King George IV. With the Royal Navy split as well, and a large number of sailors mutinying, the French navy successfully invade Britain, Faced with a massive French force on their island, along with a massive number of rebels, the British royal family and the conservative elements of the aristocracy and gentry flee for their overseas dominion of Canada. As the Scottish heavy imperial forces prove mainly loyal to the monarchy, the colonies remain stable, with the exception of India, whose loss of support from Britain leads to many Indian princes and a popular uprising to force Britain out of much of the land it had won over the previous few decades. With Ireland and Britain now out of the war, the Continental Coalition are cut off from a large force of funding. Further, the Prussian and Russian forces have proven to be weaker than expected, as the Poles continue to hold back the Russians while scaring the Prussians enough to prevent them from doing much more than occupying a few of the weaker states of the Confederation of the Rhine in the north. Austrian forces, however, prove very effective in Germany. Taking advantage of the German frustration with French rule, they take much of southern and central Germany. Yet France holds much of Germany as well, and with a line dividing Europe in half, the war seems to be at a stalemate. In late 1826, the diplomat Talleyrand successfully persuades the Marshallate and the coalition to seek a general peace. With France promising to make concessions, tentative negotiations take place, and eventually both sides call for an indefinite ceasefire and a massive Congress of Nations to draw the map of Europe. Hopefully once and for all. Meeting in Dresden, a city that has seen over 3 sieges in the war, and near the Prussian, Austrian, and French forces, diplomats from the major powers spend months planning a settlement with Europe. It is quickly realized by the pragmatists in France that Austria, with the Habsburg princess ruling as the regent of France and the grandson of the Austrian emperor on the throne of France, is likely to work with them to frustrate the ambitions of its other rivals. Metternich, leading the Austrian delegation, proves receptive to these overtures, and secretly working together, France and Austria form a diplomatic coalition that soon frustrates the ambitions of Prussia and Russia. The redrawn map of Europe, gradually forming, obviously favors France and Austria. Concessions are made to Austria by France by returning their Illyrian provinces, a splitting of influence in the northern kingdom of Italy, granting independence to the Confederation of the Rhine, and the return of Tyrol to Austria from Bavaria. Prussia, performing weakly in the war, is giving nothing but a guarantee of its current borders and the removal of French influence from the nearby weak German states. Russia, crude and unskilled in diplomacy, finds itself entirely empty-handed due to the machinations of Metternich and Talleyrand. Poland-Lithuania is recognized by all the nations. France's borders agreed to be the Rhine, and its other conquests, while not officially recognized, are generally acknowledged. Spain is left a satellite under the rule of Joseph Bonaparte. The royal family of Portugal retains its homeland, quickly merging with Brazil as the United Kingdom, or the Reino Unido. And Murat is able to retain both the throne of Naples and his delusions of grandeur. The new British and Irish republics are recognized. Palliable Britain agrees to give up Malta, which is restored to its most legitimate non-French or British rulers, the Knights of St. John. The Papal States are restored at the insistence of both the Austrian Emperor and Marie-Louise, who is renowned at the imperial court of France for her public piety. While the Congress's agreement pleases many Germans and Frenchmen, the Russians are infuriated. A group of liberal officers, influenced by what they have seen on the continent, form a conspiracy to replace Tsar Nicholas I with a somewhat reluctant Grand Duke Constantine. Aided by the general antipathy of the conservative elements of the army, who are disgusted with the conduct of the recent Tsar towards the European wars, the conspiracy is successful and Russia becomes a liberal monarchy. Over the next decade, Europe sees a general peace as the war-weary nations lick their wounds. It is not a boring decade, however. Reactionary elements spring up in Russia, desiring a return to holy autocracy. The Hungarians in Austria, with the now strengthened position of the Germans, begin to plot for their independence. Poland-Lithuania eyes its neighbors hungrily, while the millions of Germans in the Confederation of the Rhine begin to express liberal ideas of unifying the German people. The British Republic thrives as the Industrial Revolution begins to accelerate, while the Irish Republic falls to increasingly dictatorial rule under a strong Catholic faction. In the other regions of the world, the Spanish and British governments, both in exile, look for ways to regain their previous holdings, while the two nations of the United States of America, greatly humbled by the War of 1812, look to find places for themselves on the continent under the threatening northern gaze of the British monarchy. The coming century will be one of violence, as nations will soon face the strong forces of nationalism from their oppressed peoples while facing internal ideological divisions. The legacy of Napoleon I, the Great.
He said it! He said it!
Then is one of unmatched brilliance and glory, but not one of stability or peace.